Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. And what you're about to see is a pre-recorded training session we did over in the United States. But be assured that a lot of the material that we cover is really applicable to any automotive application. So just be aware that yes, it is a lot of North American vehicles, but they will apply a lot of the same principles apply over in the UK as well. Now, if you do have any questions, if you're watching this during the premiere, you can just leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring live chat. If you're watching this after the premiere, then just feel free to leave a comment underneath the video and we'll get to those as we can as well. So my name is Jason Gabrinas. I'm one of Snap-on's diagnostic technical trainers. I've been in the training department since 2013, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep at Snap-on, so I had 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before I did that, it was 8 years at Subaru, so I worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shop. So I always ended up having the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my bed. Then before that, bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. So our topic today, we are continuing with our OEM specific training series we've been doing this year. And our European car this round is going to be VAG, so Volkswagen Audi Group. So we're going to be focusing mainly on Volkswagen and Audi. But we are going to, we'll talk about some of the other brands that they also have under their umbrella, because this is going to be, of course, I'm in North America, so it's North America focused, but I know, obviously we have tools and cars in other parts of the world. So the engines might be a little bit different. The names might be a little bit different, but by and large, there's a lot of commonality between them, no matter where they are in the world. So let's talk about it. I'm going to start off with, as I always do, the history. Now, if you know anything about the history of Volkswagen, it's a little contentious at the beginning there, because it was originally founded in 1937 by the Nazi Party in Germany. So the original Beetle was the first car that they released, and it was designed by Ferdinand Porsche of all people. So you probably know that name, and yeah, that's where he started the Porsche company. It was meant to be an affordable family car, because back then it really wasn't. If you had a car, you were pretty well off, right? It wasn't the uh, everybody could have and afford a car, like over, even in the United States, not everybody could afford a car, but at least we had like the Model T and things of that nature, that people could afford, and that was kind of the big deal back then, right? So Volkswagen in German translates to people's car, right? So it is the car of the people. After World War II, because of course World War II kind of put a little bit of a damper on that, was revived by a British officer named Ivan Hurst, and sales of the Beetle went through all through the end of the 40s and the 50s, through the 60s, and the Beetle still sold well, in certain parts of the world up through the 70s and 80s. Now, in the 70s, they kind of went away from the Beetle model, as it were. So, I mean, they were still, from World War II up until around the 70s, you still had a Beetle or a Type 3, was it? And then like a Carmen Ghia, things like that. But in the 70s, they came out with the Passat, Scirocco, Golf, and the Polo, to revitalize the product line. I guess sales had kind of started dipping off, so they wanted to increase sales. So they come out with a few more modern, if you will, vehicles. And then business-wise, they acquired Audi in 1964. They acquired Lamborghini in 1998. They fully acquired Porsche. They had been partial stakeholders prior to that, but they fully acquired Porsche in 2012. And the Volkswagen Group currently owns Volkswagen, Audi, Lamborghini, Porsche, Bentley, Seat, Skoda, Cupra, and Ducati, the motorcycle brand. So those are all under the Volkswagen Group umbrella, and they also own numerous heavy truck brands such as MAN, Navistar International, and Scania. So MAN and Scania over there in Europe, Seat, Skoda, Cupra, that's all over in Europe too. We don't really see those over here, but they're still out there, and somewhat there's commonality between a few of them. They try to keep them on similar platforms, as it were. And we'll talk about one of those here in a little. So that brings us to our top models. So this is, of course, North America sales numbers, because that's the only one I have. But over the last 10 years-ish, so 2013 to 2023, a 10-year span. And I think it's a very interesting chart, so to say, because it drops off pretty quick after the first few. So I filtered this down to do Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche, because I wasn't sure where Porsche even was going to end up, if it was even going to show up on the list of top 10, but it did. So number one is Jetta. So of course the Volkswagen Jetta sold over 1 million units from 2013 to 2023. So that was by far their top selling model. The Tiguan, 750,000. First Audi on the list, the Q5, 613,000. Then we have the Atlas, which is the SUV. And then we get down to the A4, the car, the sedan, and it drops off. It's almost half that it dropped off by. So you can definitely kind of see, other than the Jetta, North America did kind of have that big shift over to SUVs, and that's telling by these other three of the top four are SUVs. And then right there, out of the top five, that's the Q7. That is a SUV. And then we get down to the first Porsche on the list, 201,638 in 10 years. So it's not a huge seller, not the hottest vehicle on the market, but that's also an SUV too. So a lot of SUVs on the list, not a lot of cars on the list. But yeah, Jetta definitely by far their top seller over that 10-year span. So I've decided to pick a representative vehicle out of three of these. We'll pick three representative vehicles. So we did a 2014 Jetta. That was kind of the high water mark, both in the U.S. and overseas, as the high water mark for sales. This was the 6th generation of Volkswagen Jetta at the time. They offered a 1.4 liter hybrid that year, 1.8, 2 liter, and 2.5 liter gas engines, and a 2 liter diesel engine was also offered. 5-speed, 6-speed manual transmission, and a 6-speed DSG automatic transmission. So that's the dual clutch transmission there. Now, one other interesting note about Volkswagen is, at least back in this time, not quite as much now, but through the 2000s, 20 teens or so, they were the ones in the States that really had a lot of diesel engines off. Not many other manufacturers, they had kind of all gone away from diesel by then, but Volkswagen, hung on, and then there was that whole Dieselgate thing, but we're not gonna get into that. But still make diesel engines over in Europe, not as many over here. They're fewer and further between. And then also the other thing is a lot more manual transmissions in Volkswagen. So, harder and harder to find a manual transmission vehicle over here now. So they just kind of have that little kind of hanging on to that, right? Representative Audi is going to be the 2018 Q5, because that was the top model for that. And then the top year would be 2018 for sales. So it's a second generation. It hadn't been around for all that long. It's a second generation. 2 liter gas engine was the only available there, at least in the US and Canada. It's a 7-speed DCT automatic transmission. So there's that dual clutch automatic. And then decided, like I said, we're not going to talk a ton about Porsche, because I think we're going to actually end up breaking that out on its own, because it's unique enough the way they do like engines and things. But the 2019 Macan was the high water mark for that year. It's been slowly going up, which is not good for them. It is the first generation of the Macan. It was actually launched in 2014, and then they refreshed it in 16, and then now 19 was the second refresh. Body panels and styling and stuff. 2 liter turbo and 3 liter turbo gas engines were available, and it is actually built on the same platform as the Audi Q5. Automatic DCT transmission, and in this case, this year, the 2019, is where it started with gasoline particulate filters being standard on the vehicles as well. So I haven't seen a ton of them over here yet. There's not that many vehicles that use them. Over in Europe, it's more popular, the gasoline particulate filters. But I think we're going to start seeing them over here more too. So it's very similar to what they do on the diesels. Just filters out the small particulates in the exhaust. Have to do regens and things like that too. So yeah, that is our Porsche representative for this. So let's talk some common issues, and this is going through, of course, data that we have, repair orders and such. What are the most common problems that we see? And misfires, just like a lot of other manufacturers, a lot of misfire occurrences, a lot of coil-induced misfire problems, evap issues, and like I said, that seems to be kind of across a lot of OEMs is an evap thing, just because it's um, just the tiniest little pinhole leak in that evap system can throw a code because they want to keep those emissions down. Map sensor and mass airflow codes as well. A lot of those kind of seem to bubble to the top for some reason. And then some of the engines also had timing chain issues between like the guides and the tensioners and the chains themselves. So a lot of timing chain repairs on certain engines, certain models. Common codes that we would see. Now, this is based on the scan tool data that we have. And the top, we have the top 3,600 codes or something like that that show up. And the top two are on the same engine, same year. One's on a Jetta, one's on a Passat, so it's the same engine. There's the same engine code. And 00262, so that is a manifold pressure sensor implausible signal. So that is, once again, a map sensor issue. So the top two codes in Volkswagen and Audi are that. Now, notice no Audis show up on the list either, but that's just, I think it's just because there's more Volkswagens out than there are Audis. And then another thing to mention here is how Volkswagen and Audi present their codes. Sometimes you'll get it as a P code. Sometimes you'll get it as a one of their Volkswagen type codes. So it's like a decimal format. In this case, I think this is just Excel messing with the code itself. But this would be a P06DA-00, so that's a subcode. P130A-00, so that's your symptom code. So we can see map sensor, cam sensor, EGR valve again, boost pressure regulation. That's map and MAF related as well. So two of those as well. So we see them. And then the other thing about the codes too is that if you look up, you can look them up either way, at least in Shopkey. I don't know about other information systems, but in Shopkey, if you plug in either of these formats, it'll come up. We'll see some examples of that when we go live on SureTrack. Well, yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting. That is your, that's what you have. OEM specific features, as far as Volkswagen is concerned, they're not all flashy with technology and things. They'll use tried and true and proven technology that's already out there. They really don't have a ton of. I mean, I'm sure there's some things out there, but they don't have a ton of the, like on, for example, BMW, they had the variable runner intake and they had the variable valve timing and the variable valve lift, and you could have all three of them on the same car, and there's just all sorts of BMW specific stuff for BMW. Volkswagen really doesn't have much of that to say. But what they do, however, is they can make a large displacement engine very compact. So they have the VR6, which is the most common version. So that is a V6, but instead of it being like at a 45-degree angle, it's like at a 15-degree angle. So it can fit in a space pretty much the size of a four-cylinder. So they can put it transversely mounted in the front of a car and not have to worry about the engine base. Now, also, I would like to note on the VR engines is this is the front of the engine. This is the back of the engine. You notice that's where the timing gears are. So to do timing chains on these engines, they're in the back. So there's less stuff you got to take off, I guess, in the front. Not sure how easily accessible it is between there and the transmission. But they do, looking through the service information, it doesn't seem terrible. I had a buddy who used to work at Volkswagen. He said, yeah, we could just do them, right in the car. And I found a way to kind of move this cover a little bit. How flat rate, I was flat rate too. You know how flat rate mechanics, you're going to find the easiest way, fastest way to do it, right? So that's what he found. It was like something about pulling the cover back and so on and so forth. So the VR6 is the most common. They also have a W8. So that is like two VR4s, I guess you would say, that they don't have. They don't even have a VR4, so to speak, over here anyways. I think they do have it in an industrial application, but there's no VR4 for automotive over here. But they took two of those VR4s and they wedged them together and made a W8. So two V's gets you a W, right? So 4 cylinders on one side, 4 cylinders on the other side, and it's like a very small, compact V8, but it's a W. And then they also have the W12 that's out there, and that is going to be two VR6s sandwiched together with a common crank. So that is the unique thing about Volkswagen is how they do a lot of those engines. I just found that was interesting. Also unique with this, up until fairly recently, I guess, the actuator test, there's no traditional bidirectional controls to speak of. So it's a sequential test. So you put it into a test mode, and then it just goes through each of these. Now it's going to cycle them on and off for 30 seconds, and then move to the next one. So when the scan tool does it, it's going to initiate it. You can skip through forward. You can't skip backwards, but you can skip through forward till you get to the thing you want. But it's only going to cycle for 30 seconds, and then it says before I can do this again, before I can reinitiate this, the ignition must be turned off. Then start the engine, turn the engine off, and turn the ignition switch on again. So I got to turn it off, fire it up, turn it off, turn it off. If the actuator tests are reinitialized without the ignition being cycled, it will say actuator test not possible. Now, this is right from the software manual for Volkswagen on the Snap-on website. So there's a lot of information in there about how to run this, and there's a lot on expert mode too, which we're going to touch on briefly with this. Now, that brings us to tips from a tech. So this would be tips from people who, this is the car they've worked on, or these are the cars they've worked on. They're the resident expert in these cars. So these are the things, the tips and tricks that you might not think of if you don't normally work on these. That was one of my goals in doing this class, is to have a section with those little tips and tricks that you might not know, but somebody else does. It's that community knowledge we try to put out there. So in this case, coil related misfire, like I said, a fair amount of misfires, just like a lot of other manufacturers. But on a coil related misfire, this was Sean Shaw, who's one of our diagnostic reps around. He was a big Euro guy. And coil-related misfires on the coils that they use, for some reason, doesn't really fail at an idle, doesn't really fail cruising down the road at a steady speed. It's going to fail on a load. So if you're trying to find like an intermittent misfire on these, you have to load the engine in order to get that coil to break up and fit. So that's just one advice he gave. It's just like, well, do an engine brake or something like that. It has to be some sort of a load on those coils in order for them to fit. Next one's sunroof drains. Now, I don't, diagnostic wise, electrical diagnostics, which we tend to focus on here, it's not really going to care much about the headliner side of it, but we will care a lot about the bottom side of it, where it goes through the body, because some models have a tendency of pulling out of the holes, like, they get brittle or whatever, and then they pull out of the holes. And then you get water on the floor. And what's on the floor underneath the carpet is wiring harnesses, oftentimes, splices and things of that nature. So if it gets a little bit of water intrusion in there, you can damage the wiring harness. So a lot of electrical problems stem from this. And as a matter of fact, as I was researching this, I found there's like a class action lawsuit against Volkswagen on, the sunroof drains clogging and staining the car and getting under the carpet and things. It's definitely a problem, kind of, brand wide. So just be aware that if you have some sort of weird electrical gremlin, it could have had, maybe the water's not there anymore, maybe it evaporated, but follow the harness under the carpet, pull the carpet back and look, maybe you'll see evidence that it was wet under there. Or maybe you check the drains and make sure they're flowing and they're not backing up either, and that they're actually where they're supposed to be. Another one that I thought was kind of interesting is special tools. They have a lot of special tools that they require working on Volkswagens and Audi. But Snap-on, as a corporation, through our Snap-on Business Solutions division, manages their special tool program for Volkswagen and Audi. So if you're looking for a special tool, now you can't necessarily buy them through there. You have to be a dealer, but you can look them up. You can find pictures of them, and then have the part numbers readily available, and then you can go to your local dealer and go that way. So it is vw.snapon.com and audi.snapon.com are the two for that. I'm pretty sure we do it for other brands. It's not all the brands, but in this case, if it's asking for XYZ special tool, and of course you don't have it, because it's dealer only. Then you could just look it up and find it and go to your dealer. Also, some of these, this isn't necessarily unique to Volkswagen, but it is a tip because some people might not be aware because it's not really across the product line. Some models, like the A8, for example, newer ones, run a 48-volt mild hybrid system on them too. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into that because I have a whole class on it, but just be aware there's a 48-volt battery in the trunk on this. This is an A8. And then in the front, instead of having a alternator, it is a starter generator. So it acts as a generator to charge both the 12-volt and the 48-volt battery, and it also works with the start-stop system. So other manufacturers do that as well. So it uses this it runs this in reverse basically with a super tight belt, and it just spins the crank over that way. So you only use the starter once, and then after that, it's all starter generator when it does the start-stop. Go to a stoplight, turns off. So just be aware if you have some sort of electrical problem, battery problem, some of these have 48-volt mild hybrid systems. That's just to be aware. Now, as far as OEM specific functions on the tool, engine related tests, like I said, because of the way that they do their sequential actuator tests, you're not necessarily going to have a lot of functional tests called out, bidirectional controls called out. But they are there, especially on the newer ones, they're kind of parted out, but on the older ones, mid-teens and down, it just has that sequential test because that's how Volkswagen does it. A lot of ECU coding as well, a lot of coding involved with these cars. You can mess some stuff up if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to coding, so you definitely want to do your research on that. But you can change functionality in the vehicle if necessary by doing a coding operation. There's also expert mode in there, which I'll admit we don't have a ton of training on because it is fairly complicated, complex. If you know what you're doing, it's very, very powerful. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can break stuff. So it's kind of a hit or miss. It can be very powerful, like I said, if you know and understand what you're doing. This that leads me to this line right here: value blocks versus data streams. So in expert mode and on the factory tool, to read the data, you need to know what block of data you want to read. So for example, it's like 0 to 255. Any of those in between, there's going to be 4 data PIDs assigned to that block, and you can only look at 4 data PIDs at a time. Over the last, I don't know, 8-10 years or whatever, we've been bringing a lot of that out. A lot of the things you could do in expert mode, we brought them out of that and put them in the vehicle specific mode. And then also in the vehicle specific mode, you can look at all the data PIDs that you need instead of having to go through blocks. So that's helpful. But just be aware that sometimes you may have to read it through value. And as far as expert mode is concerned, this is pretty much the modules that we covered. Since it's not vehicle specific, it is module specific. So these are the engine modules that we would support with that. Notice how it stops in 05. There may be carryover years further on down the road, but it's not documented. So your mileage may vary when it comes to that. You might be able to get into a 2020 vehicle and do stuff. Maybe a 2020 is probably too new, but on the older mid 2000s and down, you should be able to have some pretty expert capabilities with that. As far as transmission related tests, we got ECU coding once again for that. And then there's also an adaptation drive. So what that does is basically forces the transmission adaptation to be on the next drive cycle, unnoticed by the customer, it says in the thing. So ATF change, repairs to clutches, you need to do that. You need to do readapt the transmission. So there's a special function. And then other tests in the vehicle, parking brake replacement, of course, that's always a biggie, brake pad replacement, that sort of thing. There's 2 different modes that you need to do for parking brake. There's also a brake air gap calibration in there on some vehicles. So when you do replace the parking brake pads, you have to set the air gap so they're not constantly dragging. So there needs to be a little bit of an air gap there to calibrate itself. And then, like many European cars, you need to register the battery when you replace it. So battery registration is part of that list there. So that's actually what's on the screen right here. So when I replace it, I need to put in certain information in the vehicle so it understands that there's a new battery in there. All right, with that, let's go live on the tool and take a look at a couple things on our representative vehicles here. Actually, before I do that, let's go into Scanner and we'll go to Volkswagen. And then notice this is a North American software tool. So we have US vehicles. You can also get into European vehicles if they're over here. This is mainly for Canada because Canada gets a lot of European import, uh, European cars. So right from the European market. And then we also have expert mode as well. So if you go into expert mode, it's going to say ECU may be disabled or corrupted by incorrect use. Refer to the user manual for instructions. And we have a pretty good manual for it. Another good resource if you do want to use expert mode or learn about coding or other things like the block data and things like that. Rostech has a really good wiki that's going to be pretty consistent with how our software operates. They have screenshots in there off of their software, so it's not really gonna, that part's not going to be the same, but the steps will be the same. Right. So you'd go into one engine master and then so on and so forth. So that's a good resource. So in this case, it's going to say does it have a 16-pin OBD2 connector? Yes. And then you can auto detect or manually select it. So I'm just going to pick UDS, which is the newest one. You must stop communication. There's my simulator. And then you come in here, things like ECU ID, clear and check DTCs, basic settings, codings, adaptations, long adaptations, security access, long coding, special procedures, etc. So if you actually go into ECU coding, you need to enter your channel number and then what you're going to read. So there's actually some tables in our manual as well to do that. So let's just do 1111. See what that gives us. I don't know what it's going to continue. And then that gives us this code and that. So this is a long, you would need to know what to punch in on that code, and depending on what digits in what place, it's going to do stuff. Couldn't tell you what, because like I said, I don't have the manual in front of me. And then things like basic setting, I can go into channel values. That's once again a coding function. Find my data. Channel numbers too. All right, so that's a few things you can do. In here is different throttle body, learns, readiness monitors, DPF sensors, urea, etc. So it can be fairly new, I guess. With that, all right. So let's go into Scanner and let's go into my Jetta. 2014 Jetta, 2.5 liter. Also fairly unique. There's not a lot of brands that we do this on, but on Volkswagen and Audi, we sure do. It'll query the vehicle and acquire the list of actual systems fitted, so you don't have a bunch of nonsense on there that's not necessarily on the vehicle. So if you continue, it'll give you a short list. Exit will give you the full generic list, and then you just pick from there. Now, another thing that they do, like I said, is they number all of their modules. So that's why you see a number in front of it. 01 is always engine management. So I'm going to pull up, say this one. All right, so you can see codes, readiness monitors, functional tests. There's actuator tests, and that's going to give you that sequential actuator test I talked about before. I'm going to walk through. I think I can do this in the sim. Key on, engine off. Some actuators need special conditions. I think I was able to walk through this the other day. There we go. So it'll tell you what it's cycling, right? So then I can go to next. That's going to cycle. Next, it's going to cycle. Next, it's going to cycle, so on and so forth. Simulator, not 100% accurate to what's going to be on. Special functions would be like throttle body reset, EGR reset. How about coding? So you can read the current coding, what's in there, and then you can also do from a configuration list. So in this case, we're doing tire pressure monitor. And then you just have to go in here and pick from a menu. So however many times bar there, in that case, kilopascal. All right. Another coding function in here, different emissions, gearboxes, that sort of thing. So there's some that you pick from a menu, some you have to type in a number. And then when it comes to data, right, we got data, and we can go in there, and it's just going to give us the the whole list of data that's in there versus having to look at 4 PIDs at a time on a data. So that's very helpful. All right, and then we will go to our SureTrack information, and let's see what we can see about what's actually breaking on these things, what actually needs to get fixed. So we see, it's over 1 million sold. Yeah, so that's average of 100,000 a year or so. So 149,000, 189, 2014 Volkswagen Jetta, the 2.5 liter engines have come through shops that we have information on. And you can see disc brake pads, brake rotors. That's pretty common. Headlight bulb, that seems a little high considering, I guess it's an older vehicle, but for 8,800 times, that's a fair amount. Air conditioning refrigerant, that seems fairly high. And over here, air conditioning and op is number 3. So yeah, that kind of correlates. Number 1 code, map sensor, just like the data we had earlier, going to be the same thing. And then actually this one and this one are related. So if I click on that, PO106, got to do your engine code. A lot of the different engine code variants as well throughout Volkswagen. And we can see the PO106. And if we go into the OEM testing, it should, it's going to give us different tables here. So there's my 106. Going to give you a couple tips. Going to tell you a few different things to do, how long it takes to set, and so on. So helpful. All right, so that is the Volkswagen. Let's go to the Audi A8. Now, also like yeah, no, that's the A8 from, that's something else. The Q5 there. Q5. Get out of the A8, get into the Q5. Looking something else up. Q5, there you go. So it's going to have a lot of the same functions between them, the engine. So that there's a lot of sameness across the board. So we're not going to dive into that. But we'll see 7,900 repairs, not nearly as many sales. Pads, rotors, pretty common. Tire pressure monitoring systems, that could be a little high. Coolant thermostat, kind of high. Coolant flow low or performance. Coolant leaks from vehicle. So it looks like a fair number of cooling problems on this vehicle. And then we see the number 2 code is actually that same code, but with the extra double zeros at the end. So that won't come up. But if I do this, I think it does. Yeah, see, it'll come up with that, and it'll just dial it down to the base code. Right, and then we can see the information that's there. That is on coolant. So, a couple misfires, EVAPs. These are getting down in the single digits, though, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that being a common problem. Transmission fluids, the number 1 search. Water pump. So looks like fair number of coolant problems, water pump problems on these. We can just see that with the data. And then the last one we'll pick is the Porsche. And like I said, that was not a high seller to begin with. And then it has to break, and then it has to go into a shop. So not a ton of repairs on these. 602, and that's the highest between the 2 engines. So pads, rotors, maintenance items, remote keyless entry transmitter 25 times. That's interesting. Engine oil, a lot of oil things, change engine oil indicators, stuff like that is in there. And then we can actually pop over to the scanner on this one because there are some different things on this. Once again, you'll notice it doesn't do the 0-1 and such on the on this one. If I go into the parking brake, I think this is where I found the parking brake special functions. This is assembly position. So move to install position and assembly position. So that moves the calipers in order to pick the to do the brake pads. And let's just look real quick at transmission. I don't know if this one has the quick learn on it or not. But once again, coding in there. Functional tests, calibration. Yeah, so calibrating the transmission. Must not contain any faults. And you can do calibration after selection of sensor module, mechatronic components, etc. So depending on what repair you did, it'll recalibrate the DCT on. So that is Volkswagen Audi Group. And with that, that is our time here today. So make sure you tune in for new diagnostic content every week. We will be premiering a new video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. So make sure you check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching, of course, you would be watching this on YouTube, but make sure you subscribe, thumbs up, ring the little notification bell so you know anytime we post new content. and it's youtube.com/SnapOnDiagnosticsUK. With that, time for questions. If you have any questions, just feel free. Once again, if you're watching this on a premiere, just leave it in the live chat and we'll answer those. Otherwise, leave a comment under the video and we will get to those as we monitor those comments as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learning a little bit more about how you might be able to be more efficient at diagnosing vehicles using some of the information that we've given you today. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Hopefully you can watch and see you on any of our other videos. Have a good week, have a good night, and take care.